Welcome back to the Faith and Ecology podcast, an initiative of the Jesuits for Climate Justice, Faith in Action at COP30 campaign. I am your host, Daniela, and on today's 6th episode, we'll be focusing on agroecology, a farming approach that nurtures the land, empowers communities, and advances food sovereignty. As we near COP30, agroecology is gaining prominence in climate negotiations for its ability to support biodiversity, strengthen food systems, and promote justice for rural and indigenous communities. In this episode, we also explore exactly what agroecology is, why it's crucial for food sovereignty amid the climate crisis, how it empowers local communities, and why it features in the negotiations shaping our shared future. I'm very excited to hear from our guest today, so let me introduce you to our first one. Dr. Miguel Altieri is a Chilean agronomist and entomologist. He is professor emeritus of agroecology at UC Berkeley. For many decades, he taught agroecology, urban agriculture, and agroforestry while advising major initiatives like the Latin American Consortium on Agroecology and Development, the UNDP Sustainable Agriculture Program, and FAO's Global Indigenous Agricultural Heritage Systems. He has authored over 250 publications and several key books focusing on designing biodiverse, resilient, and sustainable small farming systems that support food sovereignty across Latin America. Dr. Altieri is also the founder and former president of the Latin American Scientific Society of Agroecology. We are so honored to have you with us today, Dr. Altieri. Could you tell us what is agroecology and how is it related to the climate crisis?
Agroecology is a science that combines traditional knowledge, indigenous knowledge, peasant knowledge, with modern agricultural science knowledge. And creating a dialogue of wisdoms derives into principles that allows us to design agricultural systems that are going to be sustainable, biodiverse, productive, and socially just. So agroecology has its roots in traditional agriculture, and much of the knowledge that we have in agroecology has been derived by studying the systems that have stood the test of time. So throughout the developing world, there are a myriad of traditional systems like agroforestry systems, polycultures, crop animal integration systems, etc., which have shown they can produce in abundance without destroying nature, without depending on external inputs and modern technology. And many of these examples of these systems have been productive in marginal areas subject to tremendous variations in climate. So it is a legacy that teaches about resiliency. And what we have done is study systems, why they stood the test of time, what are the resiliency principles that we can use to design modern systems of agricultural production.
Can you also share an example of how indigenous knowledge and grassroots movements have successfully revived agroecological practices to address climate challenges?
Many studies that we have performed comparing traditional diversified systems with monocultures have shown that these systems that indigenous people have around the world adapt better to climate change than modern systems. For example, in the Caribbean, after hurricanes, have consistently shown that diversified systems are able to withstand more and suffer less damage than monoculture systems. And the drought situations have shown also that this is that indigenous people use, like, for example, adding organic matter to the soil, mulching, allow the agricultural systems to perform under water stress because they conserve water. Also, the use of traditional varieties that are tolerant to very stressful climatic conditions is also another strategy. Examples of revival of indigenous systems are abundant. In the Andes, for example, the revival of the waru-warus, which are raised beds surrounded by water canals from the Titicaca Lake, have been revived by NGOs in the 80s, showing that these systems are able to withstand frost because the water absorbs the heat during the day and releases it at night, offsetting freezing temperatures. So that's one example of revival of traditional systems that are able to withstand some of the new normals of climate change that are affecting those regions. We are hopeful that the lessons of agroecology that have been accumulated through decades of research showing that traditional systems are resilient to climate change can penetrate the COP 30 dialogues and provide insights on how to formulate policies and other types of actions that are going to scale up agroecology as the only pathway to produce food in the midst of climate change.
So now that we have a better idea of how crucial agroecology is on the road to climate justice, let's look at some more ground examples of the impact and the power that agroecology has to restoring and sustaining our food systems. And in order to do that, I have asked my friend Amishi Agrawal to join us. She is the Integral Agroecology Research Officer at Oxford's Laudato Si Research Institute. She connects academic research and policy to advance agroecology with faith based groups in Africa. Her work focuses on climate change, small scale farming, social justice, and forced migration. Amishi has researched climate impacts on South Sudanese refugees with the UN and has collaborated with various Pan Asian and Pan African educational initiatives. Originally from India, she has also lived in Japan, Uganda, and the UK. Thank you for joining us. Let's jump right in. Based on your research, what are the most urgent climate change impacts currently threatening small scale farmers? And can you give us a concrete example?
Thank you for that question, Daniela. So, I think the biggest climate change factors that we think about all impact smallholder farmers very significantly. This can mean things like a change in the rainfall patterns, which can sometimes cause flooding, but also sometimes lead to droughts. This can also mean simple things like extreme winds and storms. The concrete example that I would like to share comes from my research in Uganda with refugees. So, refugees in Uganda, under Ugandan policy, are also given a small piece of land, usually 30 by 30 meters, where they practice agriculture, which makes them smallholder farmers by the definition of small scale farming. And how I saw these impacts of climate change being manifested in their real lives was really very visceral and easy to grasp and understand. Climate change and small scale agriculture are very deeply interconnected, and it stretches beyond the immediate impacts of change in rainfall and droughts and storms to include a lot of different aspects related to the broader lives of smallholder farmers, which are often precarious and unfortunately rife with poverty. And I think that's why agroecology is important, because agroecology isn't just a type of agriculture. Unlike, let's say, organic agriculture or even industrial agriculture, the word itself shows you that.
In your opinion, why is it important to talk about all of this at events such as COP30?
I think it's really important because COP30 is a space where governments have now been coming together for almost 30 years to develop a systematic international response to climate change. But we're still not there yet, which makes these spaces very important to participate in. And I think one thing that's true about climate change and social justice more broadly is that if something happens here, it impacts people somewhere else as well. A basic tenet of social justice is no one's free until everyone's free. For instance, the EU, they still allow for pesticides to be exported to countries around the world. And actually, between 2018 and now, this export has risen by more than 50%. And what happens is that when these pesticides get exported to countries like Kenya and Brazil, they're used in the same crops that will then be exported back to the EU. That helps us see that we need a global coordinated response to agroecology, social justice, and climate change, which makes avenues like COP30 very important.
What role do places such as the LSRI play at spaces like COP30?
The role that we play and we hope to continue playing is building effective research practice and policy partnerships. From the beginning, my role has been established as something that should build partnerships between academia, policy, and practice. So currently, we're building a community of practice for agroecology actors, particularly faith based actors in the African continent. And we're doing this because we believe that by bringing these actors together, we can not only help them grow what they're doing, but we can also learn from them and enable others to do similar projects. It's not just a question of policy or business or civil society or governments, even, because something as massive as climate change requires coordinated partnerships and responses. And I think we at the LSRI are very aware of that and working on it.
And my last question for you, in your experience, do you see other fora where this conversation is being had? And what is your take on the need to have these conversations in international policymaking spaces so that refugees, for example, in Uganda, are protected?
Even though my research brought me to one intersection, there's a million such intersections that do not get covered in the quantitative language that we often use, which needs to see very clear links between one thing and the other. And I think a simple way of doing that would be to include more refugee-led voices in these negotiations, and not just refugee-led discourses, refugee-led voices, but also more frontline communities being involved at the very center of these negotiations instead of purely government officials living in urban environments, living very protected lives where they themselves are not facing the impacts of climate change. And I think that can happen at COP, but currently it's not being done very properly. There's a very clear division between the blue zone and the green zone, for example. I think there's other avenues and other forums for sure. For example, for agroecology, I would like to highlight the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. Overall, in international negotiations, we need to center frontline communities and their experience if we wish to build truly effective policies and responses to climate change.
Thank you, Amishi. Your words resonate deeply with me. They also remind me of the words that we heard from the Honorable Marina Silva, Minister of the Environment and Climate Change of Brazil. She is also the head of the joint COP30 presidency at the UN Global Ethical Stocktake. She joined us at the Raising Hope conference in Castel Gandolfo about a week ago, and she shared with a group of us from the faith-based community what her goals were for COP's legacy. And she mentioned that she would like COP30 to be the COP of accountability and delivery for sustainability. I thought this was very powerful, especially as we reach the negotiation final stages. But I really want to highlight that at the intersection of something as powerful, such as food and agroecology, food systems, and food sovereignty, we need to have the conversation of what that looks like when the private sector is involved. I've asked one of my dearest friends to come and highlight this very important intersection here with me today. So I welcome to the studio Rayan Kassem. Rayan is an advocate, campaigner, and youth leader whose primary focuses include food systems, climate, and biodiversity at the intersection of working to empower young people, promote policy reforms. He represents over 500 youth voices, and he leads a global coalition on food loss and waste. At the World Benchmarking Alliance, he promotes corporate accountability using data from the Food and Agricultural Benchmark. Rayan also collaborates with organizations like FAO, the OECD, and G7 to embed accountability in global food policies. Thank you so much for joining us, Rayan. So let me jump right in. How important is it for policymakers to listen to grassroots movements in shaping sustainable agricultural policies? And how does that play out during the negotiations when the private sector is involved?
So I come from a background where we are trying to set the expectations for big multinational companies on what they need to do when it comes to regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, agroecology, sustainable agricultural practices. So it's not clear what the definition is, what the outcomes expected of these regenerative agriculture practices, and what specific actions are companies required to do. So unless that conversation reaches like a mature level where we have clear set of guidelines and a definition for vegan ag, for agroecology, agroforestry, then companies will remain reluctant to take concrete actions. And you will also see that a lot of multinational corporations are using the term regenerative agriculture. You can see it in their sustainability reports that they've used these certain agriculture practices that are known to be regenerative. Now, very little do we actually see that those practices have been proven by the companies to lead to better soil health outcomes. But we do have some research which is not being used enough by companies to say, well, we do have indigenous methods that indigenous peoples have used for centuries and that have led to positive benefits on soil that we can also employ and use and promote, especially that some of these lands are still governed by those same tribes and people and farmers, and they have already done it in this way. So that would already cut you the need to build that capacity for farmers towards growing in an agroforestry or regenerative agriculture method because they already have that knowledge. It's been passed down from generation to generation. The conversations we're having with companies and with investors, especially investors who focus so much on risk, they really want to know at a granular level whether the investments they're providing into agroforestry or regenerative agriculture are leading to those positive soil health outcomes, so increased biodiversity and to sequestering carbon. And then you have at another hand that the conversation is happening between the indigenous peoples, the local communities, and the farmers on a just transition within this switch. I wouldn't say that that's really taken into consideration very seriously at this moment yet. And I think this is where the bridge needs to happen. Who's supposed to pay for this transition? Is it the multinationals? It's a transactional relationship between the small scale producers and the companies, and that they should be the ones who are actually stepping in. Now, of course, to say that these companies, when they do, for example, provide capacity building to the small scale producers, it does take between 5 to 7 years, according to their data, to be able to see the transition into these practices that could actually provide benefit. It takes a long time to be able to transition at a farm level from a conventional farm to a regenerative farm.
How is that, in your opinion, going to be formulated in forums such as COP?
I think generally indigenous people, small scale producers, local communities still don't have that much recognition when it comes to these dialogues. And I'm not here talking about a seat at the table, although that is still not really provided at that scale, especially at COP. I think the conversation needs to happen with the stakeholders themselves who are gonna actually use these policies. And that initiative is primarily responsible for engaging the private sector along the process of land degradation and neutrality. So this target or this goal of halting land degradation to stop desertification, to stop extra deforestation, to protect and preserve and restore the health of the lands is their goal. So we've been in conversations with the UNCCD on how to incorporate metrics on regenerative agriculture, on agroecology, on ecosystem conversion, to be able to measure and track the performance of these companies, whether multinational or smaller, towards these global indicators or towards this goal of the UNCCD to reverse or to halt land degradation. And within this process, we have been able to come up with a way or like a process in which we will be consulting we will be consulting small scale producers, indigenous communities, companies themselves, business representatives, investors, standard setters, civil society, so on and so forth. At COP30, we will be trying to convene the three Rio conventions together, as in the issues sometimes are interlinked, and the grassroots organizations and their issues on land when it comes to biodiversity rights are the same when it comes to the three Rio conventions. The most important part of these COPs. The way you put a process together to find agreement is sometimes more important than the metrics themselves. Because if you have a consensus-based process, as we just said, one pulls out, it doesn't go through. But when you have like a consultative process, in which, for example, the UNFCCC Secretariat holds the pen, holds the torch, and then consults everybody and consolidates those notes into recommendations to the negotiators, that would be much better, because this way nobody has more power over the other.
Well, friends, that's a wrap on episode 6. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we've journeyed through agroecology, how it roots food sovereignty and farmers' wisdom, tackles climate challenges, and gets communities empowered to shape fairer food systems at COP30. Like agroecologist Ibrahima Kulbeili says, there is no food sovereignty without agroecology. Next up on episode 7, get ready for a fascinating dive into critical raw materials, a conversation crucial to the just energy transition. Don't forget to tune in as we get one step closer to Belém.